Welcome to Herbally Yours, an adventure into the world of natural medicine. Here is your host, Dr. Kamhi, the natural nurse who will help you take the leap to ultimate wellness.
Greetings, and thank you for joining me, Kamhi, the natural nurse, for another edition of Herbally Yours on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. Listen on air or online at iHeartRadio, Odyssey, TuneIn app, smart speakers, or the WHPC app, and also at nccradio.org. We're so happy that you're with us today because Herbally Yours brings you the latest information about the many facets in the world of natural living. Today, our guest is Dr. Anand Swaroop, PhD. He is a biochemist who earned a Master of Science degree in biochemistry and a doctorate in chemistry from the University of Allahabad, one of India's most esteemed universities. Dr. Swaroop was selected as a fellow of the American College of Nutrition. And on today's show, he'll discuss the advantages of moving from organic to regenerative agriculture and how we can support farmers and how this benefits consumers. Dr. Swaroop is also the founder and president of the evidence-based nutritional ingredient supplier, Cepham, and co-founder of Nutrify Today. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Anand.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Now, we might have brought up some terms that people aren't familiar with. For instance, I'm sure everyone knows what we mean by organic, but what do you mean by regenerative?
Regenerative agriculture is slightly different from organic agriculture. Organic agriculture focus on ecological, it's basically tells you that product is safe, it's free from pesticides and harmful chemicals. It is being grown in a natural way without using chemicals. But it has no focus or no emphasis on ecological outcomes. So this means by growing organic, we are not actually enriching the soil or actually helping further, productivity out of soil in the same way.
Okay, well, wait a minute. So I've been involved in the organic movement many, many years, way before the USDA, United States Agriculture Department, took over organics. I'm talking about in the 1960s. And it seems to me when we were starting, such as with the Northeast Organic Farmers Association, it was very much focused on making the soil healthier as part of the organic movement, where if you're going to grow organic and you're not going to use all the chemical fertilizers, that in order to get healthy crops, you had to actually pay attention to regenerating the soil.
So you're absolutely right, Ellen. So what you said, that was the original purpose of doing, organic farming, to basically grow crop in a more natural way. Not to use any synthetic fertilizer, use biological agents, and then create a crop which is more natural. At the same time, the focus of organic was lost somewhere in this journey. People started producing more organic, and they stopped looking, for health of the soil in the process. So, they keep on growing organic, year after year in the same soil, and nobody actually took care of what's going to happen once 20, 30, 40 cycles are over. That soil will not be producing the same product anymore. You will not have a product which is going to taste the same, smell the same, or having the same kind of good chemicals in the food.
So that's interesting. And probably that lessening of the focus on the health of the soil came along with the United States government sort of butting in and taking over what we can call organic and creating the USDA organic symbol.
Absolutely. So, in principle, organic and regenerative agriculture, they both are having the same end goal. They try to make things sustainable. They try to, generate crops which are more natural and less chemical laden. So, end goal is same, but there's certain ways, where regenerative is kind of deviating from organic farming. And that's where, the focus, my thought process or talk is going towards that, the kind of demands we have for food, it's growing like it's enormous. The population is continuing to grow. We have touched 8 billion people on this earth. And the way we are currently producing food is not going to be sustainable. And basically, if we keep on, doing things and keep on producing food in a conventional and organic way, we cannot sustain it for maybe more than a couple of decades from now.
So with all, your focus on education as a young person, what brought you personally to have an interest in organic and regenerative agriculture?
So in my focus, what really drove me into it was having a complete business case. As you know that we are manufacturing plant extracts. I have factories in India and in Uganda. What I have seen over the years that, if I buy a raw material, which is, a plant, a root, a leaf, or fruit, and what I used to say, for example, I'm making product A, and I was using, say, 3 kilos of the raw material, which is dried fruit, to make a kilo of extract. Off late, I started seeing in last 7 to 8 years that I started using more. 4 kilos, 5 kilos, 7 kilos, 10 kilos.
So wait a minute. This is very interesting. So you're saying because you wanted to extract out a specific active, so you were in the unusual position of caring what came out of a particular plant in terms of an active constituent, and you were noticing that the active constituent in the plant must have been becoming less since you had to use more plant to get that amount out.
Yeah, so basically what I'm facing is twofold problem. First thing, that the demand for natural products is growing, just like everything else, like food or other items out here. At the same time, I'm not getting enough actives out of the same plant. And on the other hand, it's very difficult for me to push farmers to produce more and more of the same plant with less and less yield. So my case was very much business driven, It started hurting me financially. And then that really forced me to look at what's going on. I started going and talking to farmers and asking them what they're doing. Then I realized that they are growing the same crop and same soil for so many years. And I think, we just took soil samples. We took it to our laboratory. All the parameters are looking fine. I mean, there's no difference. And pH is literally within the range. You see other, chemicals and fertilizers in the soil, the level of pesticide, everything there's not a remarkable change out there. But at the same time, the yield is going down. And that time, actually, I started looking more and doing some research. And then I kind of realized that we have not taken care of topsoil. We've not taken care of overall health of our soils and not really looked into some old practices, what 30, 40, 50, 100 years back, our forefathers used to do, that they used to rotate crops. They used to do things which are very conventional in nature, but then they are making more sense now.
And really, what is the movement that was more or less taken away from growing plants naturally is the regular toxic chemical agricultural focus, which has been where agriculture has been going.
Yeah, and if you see, that was the whole idea, that in what way we can reduce our dependence on toxic chemicals, we can produce more naturally, and keep our soil healthy for, having more output of food and other products. So the end goal is same, but then what we are seeing that by just keep on pushing a certain kind of production, say organic, a certain kind of organic crops, and we have not actually taken a break in between and actually look at the soil and then rotate a crop to see that, if we change something in between, I might be able to get a better yield next year. Ultimately, the demand is just pushing everything out there. People just wanted to have good organic food. or natural tasting food, which is developed less with chemicals. But at the same time, it's not really sustainable on the kind of scale of demand which we are looking at.
Well, what I know we often see is that we see an increase in production initially when they start to use the toxic chemicals, because you might cut down on things like bugs. You're spiking the nitrogen and other nutrients in the soil to an amount beyond what would normally be present. So you see increased growth, and you see that there's decreased damage from invading insects. However, that is very short-lived. And it seems like it's usually about 3 years until the microorganisms that might be negative, like molds and blots, and then the actual insects, that they just adapt to the pesticides and they seem to become stronger and better.
Absolutely right, Alan, because we are looking at living organisms. Plants are living organisms, and even everything which surrounds them, all the bugs, microbes were present in soil, they're all once you add any chemical which is not natural, which is not out there for thousands of years, every living organism will react. They will adapt. Plants adapt by changing their secondary metabolites, which are things like flavones or isoflavones or anthocyanins, colors, which are all good for our health. What they do, they change those constituents to basically adapt to the presence of, say, a fertilizer or insecticide or herbicide. The things which are actually making these plants grow less, they also change themselves and they become more resistant. So, this is a kind of cycle which starts showing effect in a few years. Unfortunately, this cycle is not fast. So by the time we realize, things are too late.
That's the thing. But of course, what is the motivation? It seems like what you're describing, Dr. Anand, in terms of the motivation, and in fact, I'll ask you, what is the motivation for moving towards regenerative?
So motivation is trying to keep the supply chain active, available, and access to the food. So for example, if I'm buying prunes from, say, Himachal Pradesh in India, and the total production out of the one region is about, say, 100 tons per season. So what these farmers do, that they grow prunes and then they cycle it. They grow rice for their own food. They grow some other crops. They grow vegetables for their daily needs. Once I go and see that my yield is going down, I will demand more prune. Once I demand more prune, since I'm paying in cash, they will grow more prune. What will be lost in this thing is the rice, vegetables. So the farmers are going to lose the access to their food, and they're going prune. They're getting cash out of it, and they will try to actually buy rice and vegetable from somewhere else. That rice and vegetable has to move from a different part of country to this part of country, and we are leaving a bunch of carbon footprint out there by using transports. So if you see, by just not looking into this thing actually is creating a cascade of effects which are going to basically affect my crop yield more further down. So my move towards regenerative agriculture is to look at the entire crop and harvesting pattern in a more holistic approach, that how we actually produce our food, how we actually look at our commercial crops and focus on rebuilding topsoil, restoring ecosystem, and also revitalizing all those communities which are actually living on those crops.
It's really a winning action in the end. So I would just like to remind our listeners that you are listening to Herbally Yours on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Ellen Kamhi, the natural nurse. And today, my guest is Dr. Anand Swaroop, PhD, and we are talking about beyond organic, because we're talking about where we should focus on regenerative farming. And thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Anand Swaroop. Tell us a little bit about Cepham Inc. What is that?
Cepham Inc. Was started in 1978 as a pharmaceutical company in India. We just a few decades after India's freedom from British, India was trying to build their own system of medicine and trying to develop medicine, which is homegrown. Cepham was basically built to do that. And I was involved in that from very beginning.
So you were a pharmacist initially?
Yeah, so initially, I was, 15 years of my life, I was totally into pharmaceuticals. I was doing the same thing, which I look back and kind of shake my head that I was trying to address the symptoms all the time. That, if you have a pain or suffering and, I can give you a pill which can really relieve you of that. But I never looked back and thought about, what is really causing that. And by growing up, my father believes a lot in natural healing. So growing up, he never gave us, a Tylenol or a leave till we were 18. When I turned 18, I kind of took this as a rebellion that I'm never going to touch any of these herbal medicines or anything in my lifetime. I believe in science and I will use all the modern medicine.
That is so funny. I have to share something with you there because I, of course, do herbal medicine and natural medicine. And I actually taught a course in Jamaica, and who came were a lot of native Jamaicans who had become either MDs or pharmacists. Mm-hmm. And they completely rejected the teaching of their parents about use this tree or this fruit or that fruit. But there they were at my class trying to relearn that.
Yeah. And after spending 15 years in pharma and different companies and then, doing different things and, from production to R&D to quality control to sales and marketing, what I realized that we are actually not looking at the base cause of human suffering. And that actually brought me back to my roots, what my dad and my grandpa taught me that, use this plant for this thing and, don't really, just live a healthy life, eat healthy, follow a pattern, it's just everything just came back to my mind one fine day. And I just quit my last job. Took all my money and put a lab all together and started bringing in plants to look, what is inside a plant, why traditional knowledge works, and if we can substantiate it using the science which I learned doing pharma all my years, that there's evidence, you have to make sure that the 3S, safety, science, and sustainability are basically met once we talk about it.
That's a beautiful saying.
Yeah, so
say that again. Science, sustainability, and what was the other one?
And safety is most critical. Once you come from pharma, or I meet a lot of my doctors, and they always talk about that herbal medicines are not safe. And I always tell them
that's funny. That could make you laugh if you look at pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, but then I always tell them that you have to look this thing more objectively. Look at the data. Just don't believe anything with your eyes shut. Look at the data. Talk to companies who are actually sharing the data with you. And I understand for a common person, it's not easy to read and digest so much of scientific data coming out on each and every plant. But we can always actually ask the basic question, that's why I broke it down to 3S. Is your product safe? Do you have science? And in the end of the day, is your product sustainable? And sustainability goes beyond, farming or anything else. Sustainable means, can I take it without having any problem every day and it's going to basically work for me? Like if I'm giving a herbal medicine to a 90 years old person and I ask him to take 3 big pills, not sustainable. I have to make sure that it comes in a form either of a tea or a drink which he can use or she can use. Because so sustainability goes beyond all these things, because our goal is very simple: to keep one healthy and active. That's the whole idea. And I think if you look at the human history, we are not the most strong on this planet. We're not the biggest. We're not the most muscular. The animals were bigger than us. But then we have done something right. That's how we have reached the apex of our food chain. We are top predators. We are 8 billion people on this earth. So we must have done something right. We have ate something right during our evolution, which really made our numbers go this high. So traditional knowledge, modern medicine is like 250 years old? It's a small blip in our human history. But at the same time, we have done something right in traditional knowledge by eating right, by living right, so that we have grown to this level. So my idea is to basically look to that and try to find science behind the traditional knowledge.
That's beautiful. So you're not questioning if it works because you clearly can see through thousands of years in your own culture that it works, but you're going more deeply in terms of, can we study and explain what are the active constituents? What are the mechanism of action? Can we do a safety study? So we have more scientific data on this plant that has been used for thousands of years.
And if you look at, it's kind of unfortunate, the kind of ancient system of medicine or living, very few of them are documented. Unfortunately, we've lost so much of knowledge because it was passed down orally from generation to generation. So whatever is left out here, be it ancient system of medicine in India or China, Europe, Greek, or looking at South America, Central America, what knowledge we have from Native Americans, living in this land, that what they used to eat to become healthy and strong and, be free of any diseases. So we have to look at all these data available to us and maybe use something like modern tools like artificial intelligence, machine learning to decipher that what really worked and then look into that if we can draw something out of that.
So in your work with regenerative farming, it's not only to supply yourself with herbs that have a higher content of active constituents, but more philosophically to save the soil.
Absolutely, because on a short term, I won't be having my business. That's a short-term goal, but long-term goal, my kids will not have food. So that really, shakes me up. Then we have to look this thing on a much more bigger scale, much more bigger picture that, on a smaller scale, it's my business or, industry or whatever. But at the end of the day, can we really, make sure that there's food on every table of 8 billion people out here?
Well, there's some terms that is thrown around in the regenerative agriculture circle that I'm familiar with, and I know you are, but perhaps it would be new to our listeners. For instance, carbon sequestering.
Yeah, there's so many things out there, technical terms, and it's very easy to understand once you dig deeper into regenerative and organic. But it's in a very simple words that you have to understand that how much carbon you actually are producing by doing things in a conventional way. And can you change your ways to reduce the emission? And this goes on every level. For common folks, I think one thing which I understood when I was not knowing all these things, that carbon means that whatever gas is coming out of my car. But then I realized that this is beyond that. There's so much of carbon emission out there with so many different ways. So what we can do in our own small corners to really halt this kind of, and that's small things. We can all do it. We can all build these things in our daily lives. And then what really encourages me to see that younger people, they are so much aware. They give me so much of hope. They are aware. They're doing research, and they are cautious about what's happening in the environment. So it's without going into explaining how this works. Basics.
What does it even mean? What does carbon sequestering even mean?
So this means, where you can actually reduce your entire carbon footprint by doing any process.
Because I heard some interesting data about that, even with reintroducing livestock, which of course there also seems to be a movement in terms of global warming, reducing livestock, which has some merits as well because they actually outgas themselves, but not when they're fed correctly on a pasture. Absolutely. Then there actually seems to be the exact opposite and much healthier overall environmental effect.
Absolutely. Take, for example, something called no tillage. So what happens that, once you do...
No tillage.
No tillage, it's just another term out there, but then they all basically link to carbon sequestration. And then, so what you do that is once you finish a crop, you till the entire land, take all your roots and everything out, and then basically put new plants out there. So once you do the tillage and everything, your carbon rate is about 1.2 tons of carbon per hectare per year. If you leave the mulch, if you leave the roots in the soil, let it kind of rot and convert to biological manure, your carbon footprint goes down by 0.4 tons per hectare per year. And these are the data which has been a lot of science behind that. This has been studied all over the world. And this is the average data. Some cases it is reducing by 50%.
So there are things we can do if we make some intelligent choices. But one of the big pushbacks, of course, are the large pharmaceutical companies, which also own the fertilizers. It's all one big happy gang. And they're, of course, still very much promoting using genetically modified crops. And when you use genetically modified crops, it's linked into very high uses of various kinds of herbicides, such as glyphosate. So they are still pushing that.
Absolutely. And I think, I'm running a business myself, and, this is sometimes we really overlook the concern of larger things once we are taking business decisions. But only thing which really can make this entire thing change is awareness. Once a consumer actually knows what's going on, and they are going to demand that I don't want this, my food to coming from this seed or this crop or this particular fertilizer. For example, glyphosate. Glyphosate is a pesticide used all over the world. All of a sudden, there was a small movement started in US and Europe. We started talking about glyphosate and, negative effects. Believe it or not, we have so much of pressure from everybody, every buyer, everybody in the supply chain not to use glyphosate because consumer is knowing about that and they're demanding it. So ultimately, the role which you are playing of educating people and, talking to people in a simpler language that, what really can affect our entire future is simple things like carbon, use of GMO, seeds out there, too many chemicals. Once the consumer know, everybody want to do the right thing.
I don't know, but I would agree everyone want to do the right thing. But I do want to thank you so much for being our guest today with all that excellent knowledge and introducing us to the concept of regenerative farming. And I look forward to the next date that we have. Thank you so much, Dr. Anand Swaroop.
Thanks so much, Helen.
And thank you, listeners, for joining us once again and tuning into Herbally Yours, produced in the studios of 90.3 WHPC, Nassau Community College, Garden City, New York. For further information, email us at whpc@ncc.edu. This is your host, Ellen Kamhi, at naturalnurse.com, inviting you to join us next week for another edition of Herbally Yours. Until then, stay healthy.